So glad you are with us tonight. We are letting everybody in through the waiting room. So we'll get started in earnest in just a couple of minutes, but so glad you all are with us tonight. While you wait, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat. Tell us a little bit about you, what your name is, where you're from, if you're an educator, if you're a parent, if you're a support staff member, or if you're retired. Let us know so we get an idea of who's in the room with us tonight. All right, I am going to get our slides up just so we have them ready. But that means I will not be able to see the window quite as well. So Texas AFT folks, let me know if you need anything from me. Welcome to everyone who is joining us tonight. People are making their way in from the waiting room. Appreciate your patience as this process is going to take a little bit longer tonight, and we'll talk about why in a second. But glad you're here. We'll get started in a minute or two. But in the meantime, introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, what your name is, where you're from, and a little bit about whether you're an educator, sports staff member, a parent, retired educator, whoever you are. We'd just like to know who's with us tonight. Again, if you're just joining us, so glad you're here. Thank you for making a little bit of time on this Tuesday night to join us. We will get started in just one moment. We still got quite a few people coming in through the waiting room. But in the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat, and we'll try to get started as quickly as possible. I know time is very precious in your evenings. All right, we will go ahead and get started because time is short, but this is being recorded. So if for whatever reason you're just joining us, don't worry about it, get settled. You will get this recording after the session. So welcome everybody. So glad you are here with us tonight. My name is Nicole Hill. I'm the communications director with Texas AFT and one of your cruise directors for tonight's voyage. We will be talking all things elections tonight, all things voting tonight. We have some very special guests for you, who I think are already on the call. So preview of that. Be very excited. Stay with us through the whole thing. We will take action together as we always do on these calls at the end, but we have something a little bit different planned for you tonight. So I will go ahead and kick us off. And if you are coming to us after attending the first two sessions or one of the first two sessions of the Educating Texas series, so glad you are back. But if you are new, we are so glad you're here, and we will talk a little bit about why we're here. But first, just putting this slide here so we are all aware of it. Texas AFT does have a code of conduct. We want to make every space we are in positive and respectful, free of discrimination and harassment, regardless of anybody's race, ethnicity, religion, color, sex, age, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity, or expression, ancestry, pregnancy, any other characteristic protected by law. But we also want to make this a positive and respectful environment for educators and people who care deeply about public education. So just a reminder, as we talk with each other tonight and are in this space, that's the energy we want to bring. To make that work, we really want to remind you of some norms. So there are going to be a lot of folks on this call tonight. We've got 83 right now and a bunch more coming through the waiting room. So to make this space both a safe space, but also help keep things moving, please stay on mute. Keep your mic muted throughout the presentation. We definitely want to make sure we have time for questions. Please use the chat, use the raise hand functions, just so we can keep things moving. You have already encountered number 2 here, which is your Zoom display name should match your meeting registration. That is because we have had a few incidents in this series and some of our other events recently where folks have come in with maybe ill intentions toward this space, and they have come in trying to hide who they are. So we have implemented some stricter protocols. It does mean that this process is going to take a little bit longer. It's why it took longer to get through the waiting room. We do appreciate your patience for that, and for everybody changing their names, helping us verify you are who you say you are. All that said, we do want to assume best intentions within reason. We are here to have a dialogue and debate. We talk about a lot of complex issues on these calls, and that's great. But we do reserve the right to remove anybody in these meetings who is making personal attacks on other participants, who are participating in anti-union or anti-public education trolling, or are making discriminatory, racist, or otherwise offensive comments. So if you see any of that happening, as a participant in this meeting, please report it. We have a bunch of Texas AFT staff on here as co-hosts. You can DM us if you're comfortable doing that. But just wanted to set that norm for you all now, but also share why this is happening. We had a couple of instances of very pro private school voucher folks, loud voucher lobbyists among them, try to get into this meeting and disrupt the space. That is not what we're here for. That's not what you all are here for. We are here to, in good faith, talk about the importance of public education. So that is why we really wanted to crack down and make sure that this is a safe space for all of you. The positive of that is it means you are scaring some people, some very powerful people. They do not want you to participate in your democracy. They do not want you to participate in this election. They want to have that power instead. So the good news is we are making waves. They are very scared that educators are participating, are active and engaged, and that's something I think everybody on this call should wear with pride. Okay, so a little bit about the attacks on education that we are apparently witnessing in this meeting series, and then I'll hand it back to Zev. So if you haven't been on any of our Educating Texas calls and you're like, wow, what's all this drama about? The reason we are having these calls in the first place is because we all, I think, know public education is under attack in Texas. But more than that, democracy is under attack in Texas. And you see that in some of the instances on this slide, where we've got an elected school board being taken over by the state and kicked out. We've got bills moving through the legislature to ban civics instruction and books that make them uncomfortable. We've got a bill that is going into effect now or will be soon that really took local control over working conditions out of the hands of city and municipal governments because they were passing things the legislature did not like. We also see it in our gerrymandered districts and redistricting processes. So we have talked a lot about how our goal is to have a thriving public school system in Texas and how achievable that dream is with all of the money and resources we have. But to get to that future, to get to that vision of thriving public schools, we need to make an environment that is amenable to those those thriving schools. And that means building a thriving democracy. So that is what this series is about. We are really going back to basics on civics education in a lot of these sessions. If you haven't been to the previous two, we do have a YouTube playlist with those recordings. This one will join it later this week. Go back, watch them. I really do encourage you to do so because I think you will learn a lot, even if you think you know how power is wielded in Texas and who does what. So that's the genesis of why we're here tonight. We are here because the people in power in this state aren't listening, and they are not listening because they are not facing electoral consequences for not listening. So we need to make sure that not only the people on this call and your direct network understand the stakes for public education in this election year, but we need to make sure educators across this state understand that, as well as parents and grandparents and students themselves. So quickly, I just want to walk through the rest of our schedule. So we are going all the way through May this year with these sessions every 2 weeks on Zoom. The next one actually falls on election day in the primary election, and that'll be a watch party. We have some fun stuff planned for you, including some prizes and giveaways. So please do join us for that one. But we have plenty more where that came from, covering a lot of different aspects of civics, of politics, of elections. We've got a really exciting couple of sessions in April planned with AFT. If there is an asterisk next to any of these, that means those sessions are available for continuing professional education credits. So if you are an educator looking for PD credits, sign up for these sessions now. You will get 1 or 1.5 hours, depending on which session it is. You can register for them now, and you'll have them on your calendar ready to go. So now I'm going to send it over to Zeph.
Nicole, thank you very much. I appreciate being here with everyone tonight. And we are going to start off with that dreaded pop quiz. It's been a while since I've given a pop quiz in my middle school classroom. But Nicole said she was going to make this really easy tonight for everybody because I think we've been talking about this pop quiz question for a couple of years now. Answer the question in the chat. What is the basic allotment? What is the amount? What is the basic allotment due? What is that figure for the state of Texas? And I'll give everybody a second to lean into that chat. I see some folks getting close, Allison. The amount of dollars allocated per student. I like some answers that I'm seeing in the chat. I'm seeing some figures. Oh, Stacy is getting really close. Eileen. All right. So let's reveal that answer. What is the answer to our pop quiz? 6160. I think Eileen had that figure down. That is the per student amount of the basic allotment that funds our schools. This is what the state pays our schools to help make the schools run. And this amount has remained stagnant since 2019, not because we can't move it. I think everyone is aware of it. As a matter of fact, even after funding the largest tax giveaway that I think that we've ever funded in the state of Texas this last legislative session, no money for schools, lots of tax giveaway money. Even after that, we are now almost back to the same place that we were in available funding for public schools, but that money is still being held hostage. I want to talk about this for a second. 6160, not moving since 2019, not moving through the pandemic. When you look at headlines where you see Fort Worth ISD is laying off positions, when you look at headlines where schools are not meeting academic standards or falling below the line, that has a direct impact on the funding that is available to our students. And let me make sure that we make sure everybody is very clear about this piece, because I've said it and we're going to continue to say it. Texas is now, I used to say Texas was the 9th largest economy in the world. Texas is now the 8th largest economy in the world. We are literally outgrowing the economic viability of entire countries on this planet, yet we have not increased the funding for our public schools. That should sink in really deeply. And I want to say that this voucher piece, let me go a little bit deeper, because those of you that are on this call that have been around long enough to understand what happened with our hospital systems, or maybe those of you living in rural Texas right now who have to drive 3 hours to actually get to a hospital because the hospitals in your communities, in your rural areas have closed down. That is because of the last 30 years of profitization going into being injected into the healthcare system. Education is the one main industry left that has the least, despite the fact that we have a lot of privatization going on. Ask any teacher on this call and they will tell you that vendor contracts seem to run and rule the day in most decisions that are being made. We are still the industry with the least amount of intrusion from the private sector, which is why there is such a hard push to inject privatization into public education in any way possible, whether it's curriculum, whether it's tuition for private schools and vouchers, whether it's buses, whatever, you name it. So there's two pieces of this money puzzle you've got to really watch. What goes to our students and where it comes from and who's going after it. Because if they're extracting it in a net profit, then that is money that is being taken away from our kids. So I went into that maybe a little bit longer, but this is about educating Texas, and we want to make sure that we have good information so that we can work together for the betterment of our schools. Nicole, next slide. So what happens when we don't vote? Well, what happens when we don't vote is people like Greg Abbott get away with holding our public school funding hostage through a regular session and multiple special sessions. What happens then is you see Abbott's Elementary starting to crumble because they haven't done what they need to do. You see the shortages, you see the issues that are going on. You see the opposite of what we named Utopia Elementary School over the last session when we were laying out what it actually would take and how realistic it really was to not have to fight over scarcity in schools, but make sure that our kids had access to everything they possibly needed. This is what happens when we don't vote, because Greg Abbott did not get elected because he got the majority of the votes of the people available in the state of Texas. Texas is a non-voting state. And I'm going to say this, we take a lot of heat of our colleagues, teachers, and others in the profession of voting for parties and not necessarily for issues, because I will also say one party is not necessarily always better than the other one. You have to look at the people. You have to look at the individuals. You've got to pay attention to the issues. He would not get elected if normal, regular people that care about public schools connected the dots between what is happening in everyday classrooms to their investing 15 minutes and going to the polls. When Texas actually starts voting more like most other states or at the same rates that most other states do, then the likelihood is the results will not be the same, and we can get something that is different than what we currently have. So that's my challenge to you. Step up, talk to your family, talk to your colleagues, and get out there and vote. Because when we do, when we actually go and people are in agreement on issues around public school and public education, just with the electorate that we have, with the people that would elect a Greg Abbott, we had 84% of them pass the COLA bill for our retired educators. That's huge. You can't tell me that Texans don't care about public schools. You can't tell me that Texans don't care about the people who work in those schools and the kids who are in those schools. They don't care about a lot of the games that get caught in the middle, but that is exactly what's happening with Abbott right now. We've got to shut those games down. We've got to vote. And I'm going to let Anthony go into some of the more details about this. The board has to hold me back at times. Staff has to hold me back at times. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to talk to my members for a second. There are some of you on this call. I guarantee you, you have probably, you have been one of the people that did not vote in an election where we lost by a handful of votes. I don't know how many times we have put our heart and soul into trying to do the right thing and elect the right people, only to find out that they lost by less votes than we actually had AFT members in that district to win had they got out and vote. My first inclination is I want to publish the list of every single one of those people who didn't vote to everybody on their campuses and where they are, because the rest of us suffer when we end up having those same wackadoodles go back to office and do the things that they do. So please, 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 trying to balance between hope and aspiration and flat out, straight out shaming. Go out and vote. Get your colleagues to participate in this process. Thank you. Anthony?
Yeah, thanks, Zeph. Yeah, I'm Anthony Elmo, Texas AFT's political director. So nice to be with all of you tonight. Today's the first day of early voting. So if folks have not voted today, you missed your easiest opportunity because the polls were kind of slow today, statewide. And so you've got another chance tomorrow to get out and cast your ballot for your neighborhood public schools. So we're definitely appreciative to have all of you here with us tonight. And thank you to the people that did vote today. There are lots of people that did. We appreciate it. We're happy about you taking the time to do that. And hopefully you took a friend or a colleague or a family member with you as well. Next slide. One of the things Zeph mentioned this a couple of seconds ago about the amount of AFT members that we have in districts around the state. And it's really important that all of you understand that you aren't just in a district or in an area of the state by yourself. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of other AFT members and educators that live in your same neighborhoods, that when you stand together, you have significantly more power than you would on your own. And so it's really something to keep in mind that a lot of folks think to themselves, well, my vote doesn't matter. I'm just one person. But the reality of the situation is that you have hundreds, if not thousands, of colleagues that have the same problems that you do in your workplaces and in your schools and on your campuses, that are voting, that need to vote for the same reasons that you're voting. So definitely keep this in mind. We're joined tonight by two people who most recently lost their elections by a very small amount, and people who ran before them lost by very small amounts in the districts that they're running in for Congress and for the state house. And so we need to. That's why we Nicole and I and the other people who put this together specifically thought about an opportunity to bring together candidates and or people that are running in districts that we lost by a very small amount in this last election cycle in 2022. So that's the purpose of why we brought these folks here with us tonight, Michelle Vallejo and Christian Carranza, who we're going to hear from in a second. So next slide. We also wanted to make sure to bring your attention to this, is that we had one of our AFT presidents run against Harold Dutton last election cycle. Representative Dutton had a poor record on public education. We wanted to hold him accountable to that, and we were able to work with our AFT president in Aldine, Candace Houston, who ran a strong race against many multi-term incumbent and lost by 219 votes. And there were more than enough AFT members that could have swung that election had they been motivated to go vote and had they gone out and cast their ballots during that primary. We would have an AFT president, an educator in the legislature right now. And so this is an example we always look at and always turn to, that if we were able to help a person who had never run for office before to come within 219 votes of defeating a multi-term incumbent, then there are lots of folks out there, hopefully on this call right now, that can run for office in the future and win and take your place, being a leader in this state. So whether it's your school board, whether it's your the state house, state board of education, there's always opportunities, and literally every vote counts. And so next slide. One of the candidates we have with us tonight, Christian Carranza, is running in HD 118, a seat that's currently held by a Republican, John Lujan, who is extremely conservative. He voted against a teacher raise. He voted for additional charter school expansion. He voted against a COLA. He voted for the book ban. All these different pieces of legislation that we are just steadfastly against, or even the planks of our school funding platform that we're for. He voted against all these things across the board. This is a very competitive district. The candidate that ran last time, Frank Ramirez, lost by 1,800 votes in a district where there was easily more than enough, again, educators and AFT members to make a difference. So we point to these examples as the reality of the situation in Texas, that you may think to yourself, well, this is a red state. It's impossible to ever get the right people in there, whether they're good Republicans on public education or good Democrats on public education. It just seems like it's impossible to do. But the reality is a lot of these districts are closer than they appear to be, and are opportunities for us to get the right folks in there. So definitely wanted to draw attention to that. Next slide. You can see what the turnout looks like in Texas. And this is the reality. This is where folks can, see what's on the evening news and hear about all these voting records being blown up and all these, people are swamping the polls. But the reality is not really. We do not have that many registered voters coming to the polls to vote. The numbers should be significantly higher than they have been the last few years. This is a presidential year, so we expect the presidential year turnout to look like that 2020 turnout, to look closer to 60% or so, but it won't be like that in the primary. Like the primary is right now. It's the first day of early voting is today. We are voting all the way through March 1 in the early vote period. And so the thing to keep in mind is that the turnout in these primary periods are going to be really low. We're talking about 10%, we're talking about 20%. And so I definitely want folks to be aware of that the decisions are being made by a very small amount of people who are affecting who our leaders are. And I want folks to definitely keep that in mind and think about that as we're moving forward. Next slide. And can I have the next slide too, please? I want to now bring up our two esteemed guests and kind of kick some questions to them so that they can take the stage. I'm so appreciative of two candidates that are willing to put their names on a ballot, especially that are so well qualified and strong Latinas in this state, in Michelle Vallejo and Christian Carranza. I'm going to start with Michelle Vallejo, who ran for Congress last time and came up just short. And now we have a real opportunity to support her in the RGV and in San Antonio. And so I want to kick it over to Michelle Vallejo first to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about why you chose to run again now for a second time. You chose to run the first time, and tell us a little bit about why you chose to run again and what you're hoping to build upon in this election cycle.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthony and Zeph and Nicole, for everything that y'all have shared tonight and all the amazing work that y'all are doing. Thank you for everybody on the call who's joining us tonight. It is an exciting time. Polls just opened, but I did notice things were a little slow. I was expecting them to be a little more active, but that just means that that's the work that we need to be doing. We need to be ringing the alarm. We need to be texting everybody we know to make sure that they come out. I am very grateful for the early vote opportunities that we have that allow people to come out to vote on Saturday, for example. Polls will be open as far as Texas 15 is concerned. And yeah, so I got to go vote earlier today with my dad, and that was also something really special for me. But I'm gonna rewind a little or backtrack a bit just to share with everybody a little bit about myself and a little bit about the race in case this is the first time you're hearing about Texas 15. This is a 7-county-wide congressional district that runs from McAllen, right at the border, up to Seguin, right outside of the San Antonio, San Marcos area. And it is the only congressional district that we can flip from red to blue this cycle in Texas. So my team and I, we knew that this was going to be a seat that we needed to fight for right after the election last cycle. So I was a Democratic nominee, made it through a 6-part primary and then a runoff and then a recount as a community endorsed and a community supported candidate to get on the ballot to begin with. And that just proved that when you fight, you win. And something that is very amazing that what I believe it was Zeph who was sharing about this, or it might have been Anthony, just the importance of your vote, even in districts, even in counties that are written off. Because when it came to my primary race, when it came to the runoff, I came out 23 votes up on election night. So even though there's some stories that are very disappointing because we needed a few more votes, we still had victories. And really, we've been able to propel off of that energy, off of that community effort to make sure that Texas 15 is on the map again. And I jumped right back into this race, stayed focused on what we needed to do to win. And for me, that meant building a broad coalition, folding in people who have disengaged or just so disappointed in the process, and also how hard it is to be informed and to be involved in the democratic process. So efforts like this, bringing us together right now when polls are open with our educators, with our public school employees, this is the work that we need to be doing in order to create that change so we could push forward. And a little bit about myself. So I am a small business owner born and raised here in Hidalgo County. And I grew up in my family business, which is actually a flea market that my parents started when I was about 6 years old. Have a lot of amazing stories and a lot of amazing people that I've met there and I've been able to know pretty much my entire life. And I firsthand how hard it is for people to make ends meet. It didn't start a year ago or in this administration that people have had challenges to just be able to afford the very basic things. And in my fight, something that has also been a center point for jumping into this fight for Texas 15 and for the hardworking families of South Texas is my mom's own healthcare journey. She lived with multiple sclerosis for about 15 years since I was 4 years old. And while my family's business was successful and while I was able to achieve some of my educational goals and attend Columbia University, and I give a lot of credit, if not almost all the credit, to my public school educators for that. Try as we might, try as my mom would, she wasn't able to get the access to the healthcare she needed. We often had to travel to Houston, to Dallas, Fort Worth, to Mexico to get the care that she needed. And every time we came back from those trips, she was always worse off than before we left. And I know that has not changed for the families of South Texas. This is a region that is probably the most underinsured or uninsured across the country, if not in the state of Texas. So this is a fight that really we're able to connect with voters from all backgrounds, people who have been lifelong Democrats, people who are Republicans and consider themselves more conservative on the political spectrum, and also folks who've never cared about coming out to vote, who have always felt like their vote didn't matter, but they're starting to see the consequences of not allowing their voice to be heard. And to give you a little brief overview of who our current representative is and who I'm fighting to unseat, and I'm very excited to make sure that we get her fired this session and this cycle. Her name is Monica de la Cruz. And this is a Trump Latina whose platform is, I'm here to finish what Trump started and build the wall and pretty much dehumanize anybody who gets in my way. And what we've seen in her short time in Congress is that she's not only willing to vote against the interests of our South Texas families, on record voting against public school education funding. I know that Zeph mentioned that is something that would have made a big difference if I would have won last cycle. But she's also made it very clear that she's willing to play on every issue, especially when it benefits her politically. We're just seeing recently that when the Biden administration and when House Democrats are willing to put opportunities on the table when it comes to funding for border security, for example, Monica de la Cruz chooses to play games again and say, no, it's not going to benefit Trump, who is the person who I respond to and take my orders from. Then it's just very clear that Monica de la Cruz is not there to serve anybody other than herself and Trump. So we're in this fight, and I'm glad and grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight, because I really am ringing the alarm here for Texas 15. We've been working really, really hard and have been able to earn the full faith support of important partners such as AFT, such as Texas AFL-CIO, as well as the DCCC. I've been added as the only Latina for now across the country to their priority program, which is called the Red to Blue program, which means that we're poised and ready for the investments that I know very well that South Texas needs and deserves to get our seat back in the hands of the people. So thank you, everybody, tonight for your time, and also very happy and willing to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Michelle. We really appreciate it. I do want to make sure that there's a space for Michelle to answer a question or two, but I want to go to Christian Carranza first to introduce herself and also tell us a little bit about, just like Michelle did, tell us a little bit about why you chose to run for office. What your what your hopes are in terms of trying to flip this very close district in San Antonio, and as a young Latino running for office. So love to hear your perspective, and thank you for being with us. And we'll come back momentarily, Michelle.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on this evening. I first just want to extend my gratitude to AFT, to Zeph, to Nicole, to you, Anthony. The AFT endorsement has truly really validated my campaign, and it's also offered me a bigger platform to talk about public education, which is the #1 topic, #1 issue in House District 118. So first, just want to say thank you so much. And yeah, I'm running in House District 118. So this is a swing seat. It's one of the few battleground districts that we have in Texas. Would love to introduce myself. So I grew up on the south side of San Antonio, in a really low income neighborhood. I was raised by a single mom. My mom has always had health issues, very similar to Michelle, but really struggled to have health insurance. So I started working when I was 16 years old. I got my first job at Bill Miller's. And if you're from San Antonio, you know that that's everybody's first job. And, I remember a few years later when I was in college, I got a call from my mom, and she let me know that her health had gotten worse. And as a result of that, she lost her job and was going to have to move into a women's shelter. So I did what I think any daughter would do. I left school my senior year of college, and I came back home to San Antonio to work a full-time job waiting tables and help my mom get back up on her feet and just navigate healthcare that we could afford together. And that experience really inspired me to work for campaigns and for candidates that lift up the dreams for working people. So I spent the last 10 years as a community organizer. I worked for a lot of amazing candidates like Wendy Davis, Gina Ortiz-Jones, Julian Castro, and most recently, I worked for the DNC in the White House, where I laid the groundwork for President Biden's reelection campaign. I'm very proud of that work. I'm proud of all of the organizing efforts that I've led throughout the years. I've registered 10,000 voters here in Texas. So, I'm a real organizer, and I love getting to engage voters throughout this campaign. So House District 118, for those who don't know, and I know that Anthony gave us a primer, House District 118 is a very, very important flip opportunity, and it's Democrats' #1 flip opportunity in the whole state of Texas. So it's the one House seat that President Biden and Beto won. We just lost at the state House level. So there are no donation limits in Texas state House races, which means that Republicans can pour in millions of dollars. So what ended up happening last cycle, even though that this is still, a Biden +3 district, what happened last cycle is Democrats got out communicated. So we can't let that happen. Now that John Lujan has taken votes, he's taken a lot of them, and they're all bad. So there's a lot to hit him with this time around. I'm working hard right now in the primary. I have one other person that I'm running against. And so, I'm doing everything that I need to get out the vote and talk to everyone that I can. So, we're texting, we're phone banking, we're knocking doors, we're on digital, we're sending mail, we're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. And, we're going to have a few weekend of action canvases this weekend, and the following weekend we're going to have Congressman Castro with us March 2nd. So if you're in the San Antonio area and you'd like to knock doors with us, we would love your help. We definitely want to make sure that we're driving out turnout for the primary, because that makes it easier and better for us to have high turnout in the general. So all the work that we do right now is really going to help us 100% as we get into the general election. So I will put in my email address. It's just christian@christianfortexas.com. I'm going to put that in the chat along with my website, which is just christianfortexas.com. Would love for you to get signed up that way. And, I'll be around in the chat if folks have other things that they need from me. But, I'm really excited about this race. It's my first time running. I'm 33 years old. And, you got to have a bold voice to be in Austin. And I think that I have that energy and that, that know-how, that coalition building skills to get there. So thank you again for everyone that's been showing me love in the chat. I'm going to drop in my contact information, and I really look forward to getting to know more folks. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Christian. I want to make sure to give space to, and we have time for probably 1 or 2 questions. If folks have a question for either Michelle Vallejo or Christian Carranza, feel free to either drop it into the chat and we'll read it off, or if you desperately need to come off mute, we can try to work that out too. So I wanted to make sure to give that space for folks to ask a question if anybody had anything. And please do reference the chat if you have just joined us or have not been looking at the chat. There are lots of links in the chat, both to Michelle's campaign, to Christian's campaign, and to our campaign pages at Texas AFT, so you can see all the different work that we're doing, and our endorsed candidates, our political volunteer form, our hotline. All are things that you can sign up for. So hopefully you can get in there. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to hand this over to Nicole Hill, and I'm also going to make sure to thank very clearly and very deeply our 2 candidates for joining us tonight. We really appreciate Michelle and Christian joining us. They're 2 great pro-educator candidates that we hope can join Congress and join the Texas House in this next election cycle. So thank you both for being with us. We really appreciate it. Christian is running. Somebody asked who is Christian running against. She is in both a Democratic primary, and then she is running. If she wins her Democratic primary, she would be running against John Lujan, the current Republican state representative, in November. So let me hand it over to Nicole. Thank you.
1 second. Michelle, do you have any parting words?
Say one more.
Yeah.
I wanted to share one more thing that is really exciting, and I skipped over it. And it's the fact that this cycle, Texas 15, because it's a presidential election, and we're seeing also the fact that we have a Senate race and Ted Cruz is going to be on the ballot. The last time Ted Cruz ran, he lost by 12 points in our current district lines. So despite the gerrymandering efforts, we have the voters here that we need to make sure we have the right amount of resources to make sure we're knocking on their door, we're calling them, making sure they come out to vote, making sure that the people that they know come out to vote. So just wanted to share with everybody, because every bit of support for Texas 15 will get rid of Monica de la Cruz, but we're also going to do what we need to get rid of Ted Cruz while we're at it.
Excellent. Thank you. That is a very good note to end on. All right, give me 1 second and I will bring us back to our slide deck. Thank you to both of the candidates for joining us. I hope you all felt good about hearing from those two great candidates in two different parts of the state. Just a note, I think Anthony said this many times already, but we are already in election season. First day of early voting was today. This runs through March 1st. So you have until next Friday to vote early, and election day is March 5th. Both of these ladies are on the ballot on March 5th. Please make sure that you have your plan to vote. And Anthony, I'm actually going to kick this back to you to talk a little bit about how to vote in this state, because I hear it's complicated.
Hey, all. Yeah, thank you very much. The rules around voting are very complicated, and I'm sure many of the folks on this call are well aware of them. The rules around mail ballots are complicated, and the legislature made them more complicated on purpose. You also need ID to vote in this state. This is not the majority of states where you need some type of ID, but in Texas you do. Folks do often get turned away at the polls for not having proper ID. So this is definitely something to be aware of in terms of making sure to bring your information to the polls. And it's also important to note that the most effective thing to do and to urge your friends and family in terms of voting is to vote early, because if there's early voting provides lots of time to fix problems, whether or not it's a problem with where you're registered or your address, or potentially a ballot that is a mail-in ballot that was sent in and returned to you or not counted correctly. All of these things can be fixed early on. It's a lot harder to fix them on election day itself on March 5th. So definitely something to keep in mind. Next slide. We've been mentioned a couple of times. We've been mentioning a couple of times throughout the evening. Early voting started today. Most counties, the polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It's not every county that's doing early voting at that time frame. You can vote usually in your neighborhood polling location, but if your neighborhood polling location is not open for early vote, your city hall in your county or in your town is almost always a polling location as well. And during the early vote period, anyone can go to their city hall or to a main voting early voting center and cast their ballot. So there is a website there, and I'm sure people have dropped in the chat as well, that you can share and check out your own registration and make sure of where you can go cast a ballot in your neighborhood and in your town. So there is the Texas Secretary of State's website is there, and folks are dropping it in the chat as well. Next slide. There are a variety of accommodations too. If for some reason you can't get out of the car, you can request to do curbside voting if you are a person who has a disability and you're physically unable to get into the polling place. If you cannot speak English, you can also use an interpreter to help interpret your ballot with you as well. And you can find out more information about this at votetexas.gov, where you can find out all the details about what accommodations are available to you in order to help you cast your ballot. Next slide. Next slide, Nicole.
I'm frozen. 1 second.
Sorry. And then here's a number of resources for you in case you run into a problem where you either cannot cast a ballot yourself or you need support for a friend or colleague who's having problem casting their ballot. Here are some resources available to you in English, Spanish, and a number of other languages. And the Disability Rights Texas Hotline is there as well. If you or a colleague, friend, or family run into any problems casting your vote due to a disability. Next slide. Back to you, Nicole.
All right, thank you. So we always do an action at the end of these calls. Normally we're texting voters, or maybe we're doing something on social media. But this time we are going to do something a little different. We are going to talk about op-eds and letters to the editor. The reason we are doing that is actually because of these calls. Someone on our last call, talking about SBEC, asked a very important question, and they asked, do letters to the editor actually make a difference? Do writing op-eds actually make a difference? And the answer is 100% yes. They absolutely do. So we thought we would take this opportunity to talk a little bit about how to submit such a thing, how to write them, what is the difference between these two things, and why they're important. So bear with me for a second, and we will go back to basics on this. First question, there are no dumb questions on this, but what is an op-ed? An op-ed is usually the longer opinion pieces. They are typically article length, and they are commentary or an opinion from somebody who is outside your local newspaper's editorial board. You'll see a lot of papers do endorsements by their editorial boards. They'll do special columns by their editorial boards, but they usually, most papers have space for guest op-eds. So pieces submitted by folks from the community or local experts on subjects. Some papers may call them guest columns. This is one example on this slide from our dear Lori Duke, who is on this call with us tonight as well. But this is super important real estate in your local paper. And you will have a lot of luck pitching an op-ed if it's timely, but not too time bound, because the production on these does take a little bit of time. So don't submit something on a Tuesday for an event that's happening on Friday. You're not going to get anything out of that. But if you're talking about something that is, being discussed right now, if it's something that's happening in the legislature, if it is election season and you want to talk about that, that's a great opportunity for op-eds. A couple other criteria to keep in mind is you want to make sure that you are submitting something that's of broad interest to your community. I would argue that your local public schools are always of broad interest to your community. And you want to make sure that, it's on a topic that you have expertise or experience in. And I'm here to tell you, if you're an educator on this call, you have expertise and experience in the topic of public education. You should write about it. You are an expert. So that's an op-ed. What's a letter to the editor? These are much shorter. And at its simplest, a letter to the editor is a statement of support or concern on an issue in your local newspaper. You, I'm sure, have seen these. You can easily dash one off to your paper. Most every paper runs them in some form. Some of them run it only in the print paper. Some of them run them online too. Here is an example on this slide from one of our Alliance AFT members in Dallas. But these are usually short, like 150 to 200 words, responding to maybe an article in the paper that ran a few days ago, or an op-ed you saw, or another letter to the editor that's already been published. Think of this LTE as in conversation with something that has happened in the paper, though it doesn't have to be. You can also write a letter to the editor just on recent news you've seen. In that way, it can be just a conversation with something that's happening in your community that you want to highlight. You'll see the example on this slide, and you'll get these slides later to look at it more closely, is, Andrew Kirk, who is an AFT member, loud and proud in Dallas, just responded to a story he'd seen in the Dallas Morning News to correct the fact error that Alliance AFT is a union, not an organization. So there's lots of options here. Why are we even talking about this? Why is it important? These are, as I said, super valuable pieces of real estate in your newspaper. Even if you are not getting the physical paper in your hands, most are run online. They can be shared, they can make their way around social media, and they can really reach a large and diverse audience. These are also spaces often monitored by elected officials and candidates running for office to take the temperature of their communities. And they allow folks like you to tell your stories directly to your own community. You can also use this space to bring up information that may not have been addressed in a news article or in an op-ed, to provide counter arguments, to dispel misinformation. All of these things are important ways you can use an op-ed or letter to the editor to move the ball forward for public schools. It also helps, the more of these we see in papers across the state, the more we can really show and demonstrate how widespread support is for a thriving public school system, for candidates who support that vision for a thriving public school system. Or we can also use this to show how widespread opposition is to things that would hurt public schools. For example, like a private school voucher program. These are all reasons why these are so critical that we make sure that all of our communities are hearing from us in these ways. So what should you write? How do you choose between writing a letter to the editor or writing an op-ed? So the biggest thing is an op-ed's going to be longer. Typically, papers do vary on their word counts for these things, but typically it's between 500 to 700 words. So you want to make sure that you've got enough to say about a thing to merit an op-ed. Other considerations, if you're thinking about that route, if you're thinking about that longer piece, is you want to make sure the topic is of interest to most readers of whichever publication you're submitting to, and that you've got something new, interesting, or unexpected to say. A lot of times that can literally be just the perspective of an educator, the perspective of a para, the perspective of a custodian in a school. Those perspectives aren't often heard, even in the most well-reported news stories on public schools. And again, as I said a minute ago, you want to make sure if you're thinking of an op-ed that you are writing about something that is bigger than maybe 150, 100 words can encapsulate. You also want to make sure that whatever you're writing about is going to be relevant in a few weeks' time. So this gets back to that timely but not time-bound piece I said a minute ago. Op-eds typically have a longer lead time before they will be published. So you may submit it and it could be a couple weeks before it actually makes its way into the paper. So you want to factor that in. If you go through all of this and you realize, oh, maybe it's not an op-ed, and you want to pivot to a letter to the editor, great, good. That is a much shorter timeline. You can write a response, submit your letter to the editor. Most of the time it's you email the paper pretty quickly, easily. You may see your LTE published within 1 to 2 days. They're short, they're easy to edit, and they can get churned out quite quickly. So if you are commenting on a story you saw in the paper, maybe you didn't appreciate the way a topic was covered. Maybe you thought a story really privileged the perspective of voucher supporters, or you didn't see any teacher voices in a story. Go ahead and write it right in that moment, because you could see your LTE published within the week. The goal here is to be concise, to be short, to be brief, and get your point across. So you really want to keep this to make 1 or 2 points. You can't, say everything you ever want about a topic in an LTE. You have very few words, but you can definitely get a single point across. So if your single point is educators really need to go out to the polls in the primaries and vote, bingo, that's a great letter to the editor. So with that in mind, we actually have some homework. We would love to see more of these letters to the editor make their ways into papers across the state. So we've come up with a sample letter to the editor that is all about voting. It is all about the primary election. And you're going to get this after this meeting. You'll get this draft with this text. And we want to see how many places we can get a letter to the editor like this placed before the March 5th primary election. So this is a draft. We obviously do not want everybody on this call to just copy paste and submit it to their local paper. Please adapt it, personalize it, give a little bit of your story, your voice to it. But we wanted to give you a starting point because I think everybody gets a little bit stalled when they start thinking of submitting something they wrote for public view. We will send this to you after this meeting. To submit it, usually a very quick Google search with your local paper's name and letter to the editor will get you to their policy for submission. If it doesn't, for whatever reason, you can always call the paper's main phone number and ask. There's usually a policy written down. There is an email address most of the time for you to send that to. Sometimes it's an online form, which is even easier. But that will be your homework. That is how we can, one way we can really make sure that every educator across the state understands the stakes for their schools. And if you go ahead and you do submit this and it does get published, we would love to hear about it. We would love to share that broadly and make sure everybody else sees it too. And so I've put my email address in here. Please email me if yours gets published. You can also email me if you have questions about this. If you can't find the policy for your local paper, or if you really want to go out and write an op-ed in full, all 600, 700 words of it, and you need some help, my email is in this for you too. I'm here to support you. We want to make sure that this message gets out. So anything we can do to make that happen, wonderful. There is one other bit of homework that is optional. And that is this Thursday, we are having another one of our text out the vote text banks. You can join us on Zoom again, text voters across the state with your fellow public education supporters. It's very fun. It's very simple to do once you get the hang of it, and you can have a real impact. You can text thousands and thousands of voters, remind them to vote, and make sure that they understand who educators endorse in their area. So that link to register for that should be making its way to the chat if it hasn't already. But that is Thursday night, 6 p.m. Hope to see you there. And we also hope to see you on election night, which is our next Educating Texas session. We were having a little election watch party on Tuesday, March 5th, 6 p.m. on Zoom. We've got some fun activities planned, and I promise that those activities will also be educational. We will really be taking a look at some of our state's government and voting rights records, making it a little bit of a game night too. So that registration link should also be in the chat. If you haven't already registered for all the other sessions coming up, we sure hope you do. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, maybe even on this Thursday. And I hope you got a lot out of tonight as well. Any closing words from Anthony or Zeph?
No, just a thank you to all the people for participating tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to everybody, the members, the community members, parents, staff, for being with us on this event and continuing to come back and hopefully learn something new every week. Take care.
Good night, everybody.